This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Two issues at the forefront of American political discussion this week: race and the economy. Author Andrew Levison takes us on a tour of the white working class, and with talk swirling about a replacement for Ben Bernanke, former Fed official Stephen Axilrod says the economy is inching forward. And Bill Press talks with Melanie Sloan about the nation's most ethically challenged governors. And guess which party they belong to. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Progressive author Andrew Levison says that Democrats desperately need votes in 2014 from people who now vote Republican. Who are they? He says they are the white working class, and they're not as conservative as we may think. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Andrew Levison is the author of 2 books and numerous articles on the political attitudes and social conditions of working class Americans. His first book, The Working Class Majority, was nominated for a National Book Award and serialized in The New Yorker. Since 2003, Mr. Levison has been both the Director of Business and Operations and also a contributing editor to 2 significant online political publications, The Emerging Democratic Majority and The Democratic Strategist. And his new book is titled The White Working Class Today: Who They Are, How They Think, and How Progressives Can Regain Their Support. Andrew Levison, thanks for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Your new book challenges the notion that the winning Obama coalition can propel the Democratic Party to future victories without support from white working class voters. Why is that group so important?
Well, let's start from the fact that America is still a 50-50 nation. In 2000, Gore got 50.01% of the vote. 12 years later, in 2012, Obama got 51%. Now, most Democrats know Rui Teixeira's book, The Emerging Democratic Majority. That's where he showed that there's a new coalition that's emerged: minorities, youth, professional, single women, and that these groups are growing as a proportion of the electorate. But the thing is, this is a very slow process, and Rui himself always said that. You can read the detailed projections at the Center for American Progress website, but the bottom line is it's slow. Turnout of pro-Obama groups can change the results of elections quite dramatically from year to year, and just demographic change by itself won't ensure Democratic victory in 2016 or even in 2020. So Democrats need to win votes from people who are now voting Republican. That's the bottom line. And 2012 showed that the best opportunity for this is with the white working class.
What is the size of this demographic group, both in terms of numbers and proportion of the total electorate?
Okay, it's a little complicated, so let's sort of take it step by step. First of all, who are they? The traditional post-war Democratic definition was that they were the ordinary guys and gals, the average Joe. They were considered the heart and soul of the Democratic New Deal coalition. They were thought of in occupational terms. They were manual versus mental, blue-collar versus white-collar, and they were visualized as majority men. Now, with the increase in service workers and the lowest-level sales workers, and also the increase in the number of women in the labor force, it's kind of different today. So our notion of working class has to change. The London Economist had a pretty good common-sense definition. They said it's people who work with their hands or stand on their feet all day. Now, the skilled workers among that group can make good money, but for the most part, these are jobs that are lower paid or often offer low opportunity, no fringe benefits, and you're heavily supervised in these kind of jobs. So, okay, that's step one. That's who is working class.
Okay.
Now, how many of these people are there? How many white working class people are there? Well, in the labor force, in my book, I show a surprising fact that about 50% of all white men and around 40% of white women in the labor force are actually in occupations that most people would just automatically call working class rather than middle class. This is a surprise, but it's true. Now, one thing that you'll notice very often is that pollsters and other people use education to define working class. The reason is that they overlap. About 80% of people who have only a high school education end up in working class jobs. Even if you throw in the community college people, still about 60, 70% are in working class jobs. So because it's easy to collect the statistics on education, a lot of pollsters will use a definition of working class as high school or less than college. And then there's one other thing to note. White working class people tend to register in lower numbers and turn out on election day in lower numbers than other voters do. As a result, the percentage of the electorate, of the voters rather than the labor force, is only somewhere between 36 and 44%, depending on whether you use the exit polls or the census data. But the point is, no matter how you measure it, this is still a huge, huge demographic group. And if Democrats want to expand their coalition, this is the place where they should look.
Are these the people that Obama famously said cling to their guns and religion?
Well, to start with, if you read that quote, the whole quote of what Obama said, it's really not condescending the way it sounds. As a comparison, if I say the baby boomers still cling to the values of the 60s and the counterculture, that's not necessarily condescending. It can be positive if that's the way you mean it. His real point was that white working people were trying to hold on to their traditional values and culture, even as their economic security and their communities were being undermined by economic change. But the broader point I make in my book is that progressives and Democrats often confuse two distinct but too closely related but distinct concepts: conservatism and cultural traditionalism. White working people are overwhelmingly cultural traditionalists. They respect the major social institutions in America: the church, the military, small business, and our system of government, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and democratic elections. But this doesn't make them necessarily conservative. Many white men and women who serve in the military, for example, learn to work together with people of other races and are actually more comfortable and tolerant than many people who never served in the military. In the same way, there are huge numbers of concerned Christians, sincere evangelical Christians, whose faith makes them deeply concerned about the poor and illegal immigrants, much more than people who are less devout. So you can't just make a broad generalization about being conservative. You have a broad generalization. They're cultural traditionalists, but not necessarily conservative.
We're speaking with Andrew Levison, author, and his new book is titled The White Working Class Today: Who They Are, How They Think, and How Progressives Can Regain Their Support. So you're saying that many working class whites are not as conservative as we may think.
That's really true. I mean, if you think about it, basically there are two kinds of people. There are true believers on the one hand and the open-minded, people who use their common sense. The true believers, they're people who on the conservative side, accept conservative ideas as absolutely and completely true, and they consider anybody who doesn't agree 100% as a brainwashed idiot. These are the people we really think of as conservatives. The other group are those who, they'll say something like, I see some truth on both sides, or I'm open-minded, or I use my own personal philosophy to decide about political issues. I used some very unique data from the Pew Opinion Poll organization to estimate the size of these two groups in white working class America. And what I found was it varies a lot from issue to issue, but basically the data show there's a group of anywhere from 25 to 30% or even more in the middle that can be reached. They're not progressives or Democrats right now, but they're also not Rush Limbaugh conservatives either.
So why have Democrats made so few inroads into this group of what used to be called Reagan Democrats? I mean, how much is due to the race?
Well, if you go back to the early 70s, the period of what was called the white backlash, many of the key issues that alienated white working people from the Democrats had a strong racial element. Busing, the opposition to busing, for example, opposition to welfare or to crime. But even then, it wasn't correct to say that it was simply prejudice. Street crimes like mugging, for example, were a real social problem in the early 70s, and not just an excuse for conservative white workers to oppose Democratic support for African Americans. But by the 80s and 90s, it was also a tremendous economic problem that Democrats had failed to confront. The export of industrial jobs to other countries undermined the decent jobs and economic security the white workers in the industrial states had achieved in the 50s. There was not any simple answer. There is not any simple answer to this economic problem. But what white workers clearly saw was the Democrats weren't even trying. They were not stepping up to the plate and trying to solve the problem. Many white working people liked Bill Clinton personally, but they didn't feel that the Democratic Party was really on their side or fighting for them. That's when the opinion polls began to strongly pick up people saying that, I'm completely on my own. There's nobody in Washington that's looking out for me.
I think there are a lot of people that are saying that right now.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. That's the research from Democracy Corps shows that there is an immense opinion in white working class America.
Mm-hmm. Has all the business about the 99% and the 47%, has that made Republicans less popular among working class whites?
Oh, yes. You have to start from the fact that the crisis of 2008 hit working class people far harder than it did professionals and executives. The unemployment, the loss of pensions and benefits, having to take lower paid jobs, losing the family home, these all hit white working class people much harder than those higher up on the social ladder. But at the same time, Republicans had gone along for so long, being able to count on getting white working class voters just by demonizing Democrats, that they didn't think they really owed working people any actual policy results at all. It's the same kind of arrogant attitudes and indifference that drove working class people to form unions back in the 30s. And it's now pretty much the official philosophy of the GOP. And Romney was the poster boy for this. I mean, he almost said, vote for me because I made a lot of money. Hey, don't criticize me. That's the only responsibility a rich man has. That was the unofficial Romney campaign slogan. Now, this attitude creates a huge, huge opportunity for Democrats. Democrats can't promise to bring back the good old days of the 50s, when an ordinary guy could get a job at GM or U.S. Steel and know that as long as he did a good, honest day's work, he could get a decent wage, a pension, job security, and a vacation every year. But what Democrats can do is stand up and say that that kind of life was something good and valuable, that it was the kind of life that a good society should strive to provide. And they can commit to protecting programs like Social Security and Medicare that still try and protect working people. Now, the GOP really can't say they support this, not at all. They genuinely believe that unless you're a CEO or a Wall Street hotshot, you should just take whatever job and job conditions you can get and be satisfied with it. Because, let's face it, that's all you're really worth and all you really deserve. You don't deserve a decent life just because you work hard. That's their attitude. You only deserve it if you're one of the lucky winners in society's great new Hunger Games. Now, you look at Paul Ryan, who is really the economic theoretician of the Republican Party. He actually wants to get rid of both Social Security and Medicare. I'm not exaggerating here. He said about Social Security, quotes, Social Security right now is a collectivist system. It's a welfare transfer system. What he said about Medicare, it's a third-party, socialist-based system that must be changed to an individually pre-funded, individually directed system. Now, I repeat, these are direct quotes. He really thinks Social Security and Medicare are not good things. They're bad. They're evil. Instead, if you want to have money for retirement, you should save it and put it in the stock market. After all, what could go wrong? Money for health care? Just save more and pay your medical bills yourself. So if this is the philosophy they have, they can try and sugarcoat it, dig up a good old boy like a Reagan or a Bush who'll put a prettier face on this. But they can't really deny that this is deep down their attitude. And that's what provides the opportunity for Democrats in the future. It's the opportunity to pick up the flag they dropped years ago and to fly it again.
You said they could dig up a Reagan or a Bush. Well, you can't dig up a Bob Dole, though, because as he pointed out, this party needs fixing. So and when you got a guy
with the persona of a Bush or a Reagan, someone who comes across as a more regular guy, right, as opposed to Romney.
Yeah. All right. Andrew Levison, author of his new book titled "The White Working Class Today: Who They Are, How They Think, and How Progressives Can Regain Their Support." Andrew, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
It was a pleasure.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. President Obama is refocusing on the economy, and former Fed official Stephen Axilrod tells us that when consumer confidence is lost, nothing else matters. However, he says, the fiscal situation is stabilizing and the economy is definitely growing. That's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Stop the moochers, shouted a flock of GOP budget whackers in the U.S. House recently as they literally ripped all food stamp funding out of the Farm Bill. They say they are shocked that use of this program has jumped so dramatically in recent years. Crying that those people are costing us money, the House whacked the entire budget for getting food to the poor. Well, yes, food stamp use is up, but hello, clueless Congress critters, so is the need. Long-term joblessness and falling wages are sucking more and more of your constituents out of the middle class down into the vortex of poverty. It's disgraceful for you well-paid lawmakers to gut a poverty program that's working exactly as it's meant to do, at the very time it's most needed. But next, the flock of budget whackers suddenly flew completely off course. Going from disgraceful to disgusting, they approved a farm bill that gives ridiculous taxpayer handouts to the biggest and richest agribusiness operations in our land. Those entities are wallowing in record-high crop prices and farm income this year, yet the GOP's pious deficit skulls turned into free-spending corporate socialists, doling out the most generous farm subsidies in U.S. history. For example, they perverted the crop insurance program into an absurd guaranteed income plan for the wealthiest farms, each of which will collect more than $1 million a year from us. Moreover, these free market Republicans would also have the government, i.e. you and me, guarantee an artificially high price for various commodities produced by the giant farms. And they would make all of these subsidies permanent. This is Jim Hightower saying, no grocery money for the needy, but a free feed for millionaire farmers? That's a moral abomination. For more information and action, contact the Environmental Working Group, www.ewg.org.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Stephen Axilrod was a top official of the Federal Reserve Board for 30 years. He's written a book explaining how the Fed works, and he says, despite everything, it does work pretty well. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Stephen Axilrod is the former staff director and secretary of the Federal Open Market Committee of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. He worked at the Fed for 34 years and has since 1986 worked in private markets and as a consultant on monetary policy with other countries. He's also the author of a new book, The Federal Reserve, What Everyone Needs to Know. Stephen Axilrod, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, you're very welcome. Glad to be here.
The Federal Reserve System is unquestionably a central force in determining how the American economy performs. Is the Fed, the nation's central bank, performing well right now? And if not, what should it be doing differently?
Well, I think is performing what I would say is fairly well. Mm-hmm. And I only say that. I think now it is doing well. And before, as we got into the crisis, I thought it wasn't performing. It could have been performing better. So on average, I take it as fairly well throughout this crisis period.
The Fed is said to be independent. So the question to you is it really independent, since the president appoints its chair? And is it too political right now, or perhaps not political enough?
Well, I think on independence, the president also appoints 6 governors plus the governor who is the chairman. So he's got 7. He's got the full board of governors is appointed by the president, and the Federal Open Market Committee, which is the central monetary policy making body. The 7 governors are the majority. The committee is 5. Which include Reserve Bank presidents who are not appointed by the president, but are approved by the board before they're put into office. They're appointed essentially by the Reserve Bank's own board of directors. So the president, the central policy, the Fed's policy is formulated essentially by presidential appointees, as it should be, since it's a national policy. So I think in that sense, but its independence derives from the fact that its decisions don't have to be approved by the executive branch, by the Secretary of the Treasury, the Chief Financial Officer of the government. So that makes it independent within the government, since it's not independent of the U.S. Congress, obviously, because it can be changed as the Congress changes its laws. That's on the monetary policy side. On the regulatory side, it has considerably less independence because there are many different regulators in the country: the Comptroller of the Currency, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Securities and Exchange Commission for the securities business, the Commodities Future Trading Commission for commodity speculation or commodity investments, etc. So the Fed is only one of many regulators, and regulation really in one area affects another area because everything is competitive in today's world. And so there's a lot of coordination among regulators that has to go along to get these measures passed in ways that are good for the country, actually. So there has much more limited independence there. On international issues, on dealings in foreign exchange, which the Fed can do, it has authority to buy and sell foreign currencies given by the Congress. It is commonly accepted that the Secretary of the Treasury is the chief financial officer of the country, and he controls the foreign exchange operations. That is, before the Fed does a foreign exchange operations, it checks with the Secretary of the Treasury. But in order to do a foreign exchange operation, it has to have approval of the Federal Open Market Committee. So the Fed has an input, but not overall control, like it has overall control itself of its domestic operations.
Okay. We're speaking with Stephen Axilrod. He is a veteran of the Federal Reserve System, some 34 years at the Fed. He's also the author of a new book, The Federal Reserve, What Everyone Needs to Know. For several years now, the interest rate has been negligible. Should rates be allowed to go higher now? And if not now, when?
Well, my opinion is they should begin gradually rising. That we're well into the recovery period. It has been slow, as most anyone who thought about it hard might have predicted, and we're beginning to get confidence developing in the country, as you can see from the various surveys. And I think it would be a good time if not now, which Mr. Bernanke has said not now, but not in the very foreseeable future, to begin letting these short-term interest rates go up and to begin holding back, to tapering off on these buying of longer-term securities, which are paid for essentially they're not paid for, that you buy them, but you simply don't have to, you just add it to your balance sheet. You don't have to sell anything to get the money. You just do it by central bank magic.
Mm-hmm.
So that, but I think the time has come, and will be coming to let that happen. And so, incidentally, does the market now. They seem to be moving in that direction.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned all the different reports that we see time and again. We're getting more and more positives without the little caveats of yeah, but and things like that. In general, given the shock to the system from the financial collapse in 2008, how well is the economy doing right now? I mean, have we really turned the corner? Because a lot of times it seems like it's a step forward and a couple steps back, and vice versa.
Well, my wife can testify. Of course, that isn't very valuable testimony.
Perhaps it is. Let's hear.
My wife can testify that it was my view, and once we got through the worst of it, and in the first half of 2009 was not good, but in the second half we began our little recovery, and I alleged that this recovery would be very slow, and by very slow I really meant 2 to 3%, though 3 was a high number in my view at that, because what this crisis did, and what in history all similar big crises do, is destroyed the confidence of the people. And when confidence is lost, you can throw all the money you want at people, and they can't do it. And they certainly can't do it. They won't spend it, and certainly they won't spend it if they don't have jobs. So they won't spend it like they used to, for sure, if they don't have jobs. So the huge unemployment and the loss of confidence, not only in the economy, but actually in the government, in the financial institutions that are supposed to keep the market stable and all that, there was just a big loss of confidence. And it takes time for that kind of confidence to come back, and it takes performance for it to come back. We've had a performance that has been not so good on the fiscal side, to be straightforward on it, because we had a little fiscal stimulus, which is all the stimulus that would really work, because fiscal stimulus, directly creates a job, whereas in monetary stimulus does nothing like that. It just makes the money a little easier to get, but that doesn't tell you to use it. You know the old saw is right. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't want to drink, it won't drink, and it didn't want to drink, as you can see. Because, by the way, the Fed's put in an extra couple of trillion of money, but it's all in excess reserves in the banking system. So that is clear that no one's drinking that water. So, and then fiscal policy was just of no help whatsoever. In fact, the reverse. And so our recovery has been fell off from 2.5% to around 2%. It struck me as wonderful. There's something strong in the system where you can have lack of confidence and then a fiscal policy that is not the least bit helpful, to say the least. That becomes not the least bit helpful. So, and you're still growing, let us say 2%, maybe 1.5% once in a while, and you got up to 2%. And now it appears that the fiscal policy is stabilizing if you're not contracting, you're not going to get worse, maybe. And the world economy is flat, but I think probably wanting to grow a little bit, because growth is what people need and want, and what politicians understand. So that I think we could be on the way to a more sustainable position here in the U.S.
Okay.
Because we have become very competitive in world markets in terms of exports, and we're a very desirable currency still to have.
All right. Stephen Axilrod, former staff director and secretary of the Federal Open Market Committee of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. and author of a new book, The Federal Reserve, What Everyone Needs to Know. Stephen, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
I'm glad to have been here. Be delighted to be here again.
Thank you very much. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Melanie Sloan, of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington.
We talk a lot about and see a lot of examples about corruption here in our nation's capital, scandals having to do with members of the House or members of the Senate. What about outside of Washington? Well, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW, they're on top of that, too. Not surprising, because they are our citizen watchdogs, I guess I should say. Melanie Sloan, the founder and executive director of CREW, in studio with us again this morning. Hi, Melanie. Nice to see you.
Hi. Always nice to see you guys.
So you've been taking a look at the governors and identified the nation's worst governors, the most corrupt, I guess, or the most inefficient, or, I mean, worst means what?
Worst means, we look at everybody through an ethics lens.
Ethics
we
lens,
look
right.
at things like transparency, outright corruption, cronyism, self-dealing, mismanagement, and overly partisan politics at the expense of the general population.
Did you find any one governor who was guilty of some of those transgressions?
Well, I would say we found 6 who had some pretty serious problems. And we did this, in fact, because people do focus so much on the problems of Washington, but don't notice as much what's going on in the states. And you might read about your own governor, but you're not going to read about other governors. So Governor Nathan Deal in Georgia is always a perennial, really big problem.
How many Democrats? How many Republicans?
Well, out of the total 18 that are on the list, there are 16 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And, of course, we've gotten some criticism for that. There are many more Republican governors than there are Democratic governors. But I've challenged anyone to name a Democratic governor that we missed. I think we covered everybody. We looked at all 50 to come up with our list.
And the top 6, you start with Nathan Deal from Georgia?
Right. Nathan Deal from Georgia, Scott Walker from Wisconsin, Rick Perry from Texas, Rick Scott from Florida, and Bob McDonnell from Virginia, and Paul LePage.
Paul LePage from
Maine.
From Maine.
Yeah.
And LePage and McDonnell are newly elected, right? Recently elected, at any rate. Rick Scott, not that long ago, right?
Right, not that long ago. But it's amazing what Rick Scott has managed to do in his short period in office.
I guess we should be impressed.
Yeah, well, Rick Scott had problems coming in.
Right.
And like one of the things that I find the most offensive that Rick Scott did was he wanted to start testing all Medicaid recipients for do drug testing, but it was his own company that would do the drug testing and make money.
There you go. He's got to be thinking about what happens after he leaves office, I guess.
Right. He's already a rich guy.
How about Rick Perry? I mean, we know he can't count to 3, but what did you nab him on?
There are, again, so many things Rick Perry has done, but I think the biggest is he created something called the Texas Enterprise Fund, which basically is a huge slush fund of state money, and he gives it out to all his friends and campaign contributors. And audits have found that it is totally mismanaged, and the money it's waste, fraud, and abuse all over the place. Something else that I think is really offensive about Rick Perry is he's double dipping on a pension. He's taking a pension for a previous state job. At the same time, he has his gubernatorial job, but at the exact same time he's doing this, he just prevented Texas teachers from doing the same thing.
Oh, really?
Really.
Oh. No, why are we
Should
surprised?
that surprise you, really?
Why are we surprised at Rick Perry? All right. Now, then it zeroes back to Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, who has been in a lot of trouble lately for all the money he took from Johnny Williams. But he paid some money back yesterday, so it's all behind us, right?
Right. This is like a perpetual thing that happens in the crisis world of politics. And only in politics is it somehow deemed that if you commit something that might be a crime, but then you give them money back, you should just be able to say, my bad, and it's all over. I mean, I'm a former prosecutor. We didn't allow, say, bank robbers to steal, give the money back, and say, okay, you give it back, we're done. So I don't think that's going to really should be the end of Bob McDonald's problems. But yesterday, Crew, in fact, filed an IRS complaint, two IRS complaints, one against Bob McDonald and one against Attorney General of Virginia, Ken Cuccinelli. Both of them accepted so many gifts and vacations and all sorts of things from Johnny Williams and Star Scientific, and that would have been income to them, which should have been declared on their taxes. They're calling it gifts, but under Supreme Court case law, gifts have to be given out of just simple generosity with no expectation of anything in return. And clearly, Johnny Williams and Star Scientific were seeking to aggressively promote their dietary supplement Anablock. And even one of the gifts that they gave to Ken Cuccinelli was a box of Anablock, and Star Scientific said at the time it was part of their marketing strategy. So obviously these were not gifts that were given out of the pure generosity of Johnny Williams' heart.
They were looking for certain advantages from the state.
Sure.
Correct, in terms of access to markets or tax advantages or whatever.
Right, tax advantages. They also were using Governor McDonnell and his wife were aggressively promoting Anablock for them. Maureen McDonald traveled on behalf of the company. So all of the money that they received and all the gifts they received should have been declared on their income taxes. But given that both the governor and the attorney general initially failed to disclose these things on their financial disclosure forms, it's incredibly unlikely they somehow managed to include those gifts on their tax returns.
McDonnell and his supporters say that it might have been poor judgment on his part, but he did nothing illegal.
You know, I find it really hard to go with poor judgment when you're accepting a Rolex and when you're accepting a $10,000 jacket. That's a little more than poor judgment, I'd say. That's a pretty clear gift. And when Maureen McDonald asked for the Rolex watch from Johnny Williams, and she asked for it right before they went into a meeting where she was going to help promote Anablock. So I would say that it looks like there's a quid pro quo that might even get them into some trouble in bribery laws. What
do you think? What is a politician thinking when his daughter's getting married and he knows this is going to be a little expensive? He says, "I know what we can do. You know, let's just get Johnny to pay for it." I mean,
right?
Here's a guy who was thinking about running for president, who was being considered for vice president, like on the fast track for vice president, and he does something like this. I mean, what goes through their head at a time like that?
Sadly, this is not really an unusual story. We see these kind of things so often, and I think it's a couple of things. First, it's an arrogance. It's there are rules, but I am me, and so the rules don't actually apply to me. And secondly, they think they can get away with it. They think, despite the fact that numerous politicians have had seen a downfall over things like this, they think somehow they're going to be different, and nobody's going to catch them.
So what happens to McDonald? Does he survive? I guess he's out of office at the end of this year anyhow, right?
He's out of office anyway, and certainly it is easier to bargain with prosecutors from a position of being governor than being the former governor.
Right. Yeah. But no charges have been filed against him yet, have they?
No charges have been filed. He is under criminal investigation, though, and there certainly is by, I think, both federal prosecutors and the Virginia Attorney General's office, but Ken Cuccinelli has had to recuse himself from that case. And Ken Cuccinelli, as I said, has his own problems over Johnny Williams and Star Scientific, and this may be an issue in his own gubernatorial bid.
Now, with Cuccinelli, first of all, there are two kinds of problems with him. One is just because he is leading Republican in Virginia and so close to McDonnell that whatever happens to McDonnell kind of slops over onto Cuccinelli, right?
Sure.
So even if he had never met Johnny Williams, he would be tainted, right? But it's beyond that, right? He had his own relationship with Johnny.
Yes, he used Johnny Williams' vacation home several times. A couple of times when he asked for it, he and his family spent a Thanksgiving there, and then Johnny Williams had their Thanksgiving meal catered for them. So it's not exactly like he wasn't accepting gifts on his own, and he failed to disclose those gifts, but later put them on his financial disclosure forms as investigators started asking questions about them. And so now he says he amended those returns, those forms, and he just made a mistake.
Again, what are they thinking?
Especially
right?
when you're the Attorney General.
No, you're the Attorney General.
You're the top law enforcement official in your state.
And you ask this guy, hey, can I use your vacation house again?
Yeah.
Can I use your vacation house again? Just one. I mean, they really want something for nothing, don't they?
Right. Well, I think one of the things that we see often with politicians is they're not paid. It's not that they're not well paid, but they're not paid in the same way that often their biggest donors. They don't have the same kind of money. And so they often think, wow, I've got all the power and the other guy's driving away in the limousine. And it tends to, when they start hanging out with all those incredibly wealthy people, they start thinking they deserve the same kind of treatment.
All right. So now, as sort of the ethics guardian angel of the United States Congress, do you think that Anthony Weiner deserves? Were you surprised what you heard about Anthony Weiner yesterday, and do you think he deserves yet another chance? You don't have to answer the second question, maybe, but
well, the surprise part, in one sense, when somebody's engaged in that kind of conduct, it's kind of like alcoholism. Are they really going to just cut it off just because they're caught? But by the same token, when he decided he could announce for mayor, you really thought it had to be behind him. You didn't think he'd want to put his wife and family through that a second time. And if this had all come out and he wasn't running, it would have been a non-story, really. But now that it is, it's unbelievable to me that this has so far not impacted his chances in as mayor. But no, I think it makes him unfit.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know that the second round of revelations has impacted his chance. I think even for New Yorkers, this is going to be maybe
too much?
One sexting too far. I don't know.
People seem quick to forgive on the sex scandal. I mean, we've seen South Carolina former Governor Mark Sanford come back, and David Vitter obviously come back and to still be, holier than thou. So people seem to be able to recover. And
but they came back once. I'm not sure how many times they can come back. Ethics in Washington. Yeah, we can still expect it. Maybe sometimes people fall short. And in the governor's mansion as well. CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics, is on top of it all with Melanie Sloan. It's citizensforethics.org. Your calls and your comments always welcome about these scoundrels, and we'll go back and talk more about them with Melanie Sloan.
Heard around the country and seen on current TV, this is The Bill Press Show.
12 minutes before the top of the hour, honesty, ethics in Washington. Yes, CREW is all over that. Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Citizensforethics.org. Executive Director Melanie Sloan here with us. Melanie, always good to have you in the studio. And you're a neighbor on Capitol Hill, so we appreciate that all the more. Right? It's a great neighborhood.
It's a wonderful neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter, what's going on?
You were just talking about Anthony Weiner and the reaction of New Yorkers and whether or not they're going to forgive him. Pat Kiernan is the anchor on New York One. They've had people out on the street this morning asking people whether or not they would look the other way on Weiner's latest sexting issue.
Carlos Danger, you mean?
Carlos Danger. Said that they had asked about 20 people as of about 20 minutes ago. 20 people, and only one had said that they would forgive him and still vote for him.
Whoa.
1 out of 20 is not very good. I don't know politics that well.
No, I'd
1 out of 20 is not very good.
Although, let's just say, it is kind of a small subset for New York City.
Right. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
It depends on what neighborhood, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do think Americans, look, Mark Sanford, Bill Clinton, Elliot Spitzer, David Vitter, I think Americans are willing to, particularly in the sex stuff, maybe not the money stuff, are willing to say, yeah, give the guy another shot, right? Give the guy another chance. But when you give him another chance and then they screw up again, at some point, I think people say, all right.
Well, on the other hand, if you think about Bill Clinton, when he came into office, remember they'd had that whole 60 Minutes thing where they'd had to talk about the prior sexual issues, the prior affairs that he'd had before. This was before he was elected. And so he got elected, and then we went through the whole impeachment, and everybody, pretty much forgave him. So I think that sometimes I think people just accept that these are flawed people and that, like, this is Bill Clinton, for example, his Achilles heel, for example, and they're willing to look past it if there's enough other good stuff about the person. And Bill Clinton is a political genius and has an amazing amount of empathy and could really talk to people. I don't know that Anthony Weiner has a lot of those same qualities. His legislative record wasn't impressive.
Bill Clinton's a lot more lovable, I think, than Anthony Weiner.
Yeah, Anthony Weiner, not a well-liked person. On the other hand, I guess Christine Quinn just isn't doing that well with New Yorkers. She's just not connecting with people.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of scandals here in Washington, D.C., not a sex scandal, but before the Anthony Weiner scandal, there was the IRS scandal, which everybody said, this is a big thing. This is going to bring down the Obama White House, because they were ordering the IRS to go after the Tea Party groups and to target them exclusively. I know Crew has been involved in this.
Sure.
What is your take on that?
This was just a manufactured scandal from the outset. It was really just so terrible that the Republicans were able to push this as a narrative of this was the Obama administration going after Tea Party groups, when that just simply wasn't the case. And the Inspector General of the IRS, who put out the initial report that everybody seized upon, talked only about the be on the lookout list, the BOLO list of the Tea Party groups. But in fact, there were also progressive groups on that list. The be on the lookout included all sorts of groups across the political spectrum. And progressive groups had some of the same problems. And there was one, Emerge America, a Democratic group that actually didn't get its 501c4 tax status. And yet none of this became part of the narrative. If you think about it, when the scandal first broke, there was wall-to-wall coverage. I mean, it was carried, the hearings at Congress were carried live on CNN. And all it was White House going after Tea Party groups. And then, several weeks later, it turns out, that's not exactly true. It was groups all across the board, but the narrative's already been shaped, and most Americans think that's what happened, even though that's not what happened at all.
I know. It was like, there's, Darrell Issa, how many hearings he had on this, but that's been now, 6 weeks at least?
Yeah, and they've had at least 5 hearings. I mean, and then also House Ways and Means has had hearings, Senate Finance has had, there's got to be 8 to 10 hearings.
But you're right, and the narrative then was all one-sided, and this is just yesterday. I've got a copy of Politico from yesterday. So let's say 6 weeks later, and finally, here's a headline, not just the Tea Party. IRS scrutinized liberal groups too. Finally, the truth is coming out. But
but it's
too
late because the narrative's formed. This is what people think. And there's also, by the way, never been a shred of evidence to suggest that the Obama administration was behind this in any way. And let me point out that if the Obama administration had really wanted to go after the right-wing groups, they would have gone after the ones with the money. Groups like American Action Network, groups like Crossroads GPS. Those were the groups that actually were problems for Democrats. These Tea Party groups that had $10,000, $20,000 were really not an issue for the Obama White House.
And the important point of the report today, again, looking at the state houses, Crew has identified 6 governors who among the worst and the most corrupt. Check it out. You can find out more about every one of them and what they've been up to at citizensforethics.org. Melanie, we count on you to hold their feet to the fire. Democrats and Republicans in the Congress and in the state houses, as you do.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Andrew Levison, Stephen Axilrod, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to